Hello everyone, my name is FlareBlitzed and welcome to Neon Sin, which roughly translated from French to English is Flare is awesome. It really isn't. But this is a game that is based in the ordinary world from a perspective of a protagonist called Haku, who is just a normal introverted student who lives in an ordinary world. While he's perfectly content to focus on school rather than making friends, you soon find out that sometimes making friends just kind of happens. Yep, just out of the blue. We don't plan it, but it just happens. So, I like the menu itself. It sort of transitions between the different main characters that we'll be getting used to in the game as well. So let's see what we're dealing with here. So first of all, my first protocol on any new game is to save. I didn't meet my cousin until we were both high school students. I would have remembered. She was terribly striking in looks. She never liked it at her school and had a knack for escaping. Oh dear. Monday. Lovely. Pale winter air burned at my cheeks as I passed through the front door and into the gentle hands of the morning sunlight. I adjusted my scarf around my neck, grateful all the while that the school had already allowed us to change into our winter uniforms. Autumn came early this year, bringing a winter chill even earlier than usual. That's what you call climate change. This small town had blossomed into a city. It felt as if it had grown with me, or that I had grown with it. Many businesses had come to set up shop, so it was still ever growing. When those new tall buildings bloomed over the roofs of smaller ones, so did an interesting and unfamiliar sight. Her hair was like snow and her pale skin glowed from the early morning sunlight. Small white hands danced around a deck of playing cards in front of a small crowd to pass by the time. So just from the aesthetics alone, I think we are in Japan. A simple trick or two, pulling the same card a spectator had chosen, or perhaps even a signed and ruined card reconstituting itself. As I had some time before school began, I watched this pale illusionist and her simple tricks. She pulled off every trick without flaw, her hands moving through them like she had never known imperfection. Watching her move was surreal. The milky sunlight danced around white strands of hair each time she stepped out of a shade. Everything about her reminded me of a dove in flight. Every so often someone watching would toss some coins into an empty cup not too far from her left. To convince others that magic could be real in these bold ways was fantastic and mystifying. Or it could be France, it could be France because of the tram lines. It wasn't long, it's like a Central Europe thing like Switzerland and Austria where there's a lot of tram lines going on. But then again, Japan has a lot of tram lines. Anyways, let's move on. It wasn't long before the clock on my phone reminded me that I need to have already been further along in my journey. Like another magic trick, time has escaped in this moment so easily. Oh, there's a little cat on the bottom right, that's so cute. Though the air stunned my face as I walked at a faster pace than normal, I managed to make it to the classroom with little time to spare. With the morning bell rang, the class settled into their seats. It wasn't until halfway through the lesson that I had caught myself daydreaming of lunch. The drawl of my mouth is a sign that I am indeed daydreaming. Something about the warmth of my scarf or the way the light from the window glittered just out of reach of my desk had put me in a languid mood. Breakfast had been light enough that I suppose it was what my thoughts decided to focus on. Knowing that I should be paying attention to keep my grades up, I tried to stay awake. There's always that thought that it would be easier to just give up on those efforts though. You'll regret it later on in life if you don't put in the work now. Eventually the lunch bell punched me from my daydreams and I wondered if I had actually truly been awake at all. Was I even in this classroom after all? Or are we in some sort of alternate reality where we indeed are surrounded by magical girls? In every anime concept there's always one guy and a bunch of anime girls. Nothing wrong with that. As I stood from my desk, the scent of lilacs brushed across me. A group followed after the ends of strawberry blonde hair that seemed to produce the now familiar smell. A foreigner who was as beautiful as she was popular. Blanc de la Croix? She had transferred in near the beginning of our summer break. She understood our language fairly well, and her accent didn't seem very strong either. Still, she barely talked to anyone and seemed content in leaving conversations midway through. It was strange to me that she was so popular given her attitude towards others. As soon as the Delacroix gang was far to my side, I left the classroom for the cafeteria downstairs. The cafeteria was busy with noises and bodies moving from one place to another. Noise, my apologies. Almost as if aware of the cycle they took part of. After being pushed through the crowded counter, I managed to walk out of the dissipating chaos with a hot bowl of chow mein. As most of the students prefer to sit with their friends, they'd save the seats beside them using coats or scarves. Friends were something I hadn't come to know yet, at least not since I was much younger. The only option left for someone like me was the worst table in the cafeteria, possibly the world. During the lunch hour, the sun was always perfectly positioned to bounce the light from the window across the courtyard and into the eyes of anyone sitting around this single table. After constant torture, I devised a way to counteract it. If I placed a large textbook in front of my tray, the light would never attack my eyes again. A convenient byproduct of this was the impression it gave others. As if I was too busy studying, no one risked the terrible table to engage with me. I was free to daydream in my crafty sanctuary. Not that anyone ever approached me, anyway. I kept to myself in school, and that earned me the perceived role of a loaf. Maybe it wasn't too far from the truth, though. Although I wanted to make friends, a part of me felt as if it would be too difficult of a task to maintain them. I'm sure friends are. May I sit at this table? As if to prove me wrong, I looked up from my textbook to find that a middle school girl had approached me. I nodded and watched as she sat down opposite to me. She, too, was wearing the school's uniform. From the plaid stripes to the ruby row, there was no mistake about it. Everything about her was small aside from the fluffy pigtails catching blades of the sunlight streaming in from the window. They cascaded from the top of her head to her shoulders like a heavy waterfall. I tried not to stare, but they seemed like they would be soft to touch. Okay. Her lunch was just as small as she looked, but she ate it in silence as if the blinding light didn't bother her. I went back to daydreaming behind my book as I ate the cooling bowl of ramen for today's menu. Neither of us talked through the rest of our lunch break. After the bell rang, I switched out my shoes at the lockers, determined to take part in the going home club activities. As I opened the door, however, an envelope sealed with a pink heart sticker dropped to the floor. Very curious. Before I could even react, the hands of a tall girl grabbed at it and brought it back up to her chest. She clutched it dearly and refused to look directly at me. Well, hi there. I'm sorry, that was meant for someone else. Are you sure? I accidentally put it in the wrong locker, so I'm glad to have it back. So you just waited there for someone to open that specific locker? She rushed off just as quickly as she had arrived, her ash-coloured ponytail whipping after her. While I felt the exchange wasn't the strangest thing I'd encountered today, it was too awkward to dwell on it uncomfortably. It wasn't as if I had expected it to be for me anyway. I certainly did. Pale skin glittered in the afternoon light, and small hands worked through levitating a small piece of hard candy between them. The illusionist had come back into view. She hadn't left the spot, as it was as if she had been glued to it. While there were far fewer people gathered around her, two small children watched intently and persistently. It didn't take long for the two of them to take even more of an interest in her world. The white illusionist immediately suspended her current trick to crouch down and meet them eye to eye. Her smile towards them was like a sunshine through the trees. After a few words were exchanged between them, far too quiet for my prying ears, she reached behind the smaller of the two boys and produced the hard candy from behind his ear. There was nothing so pure as the reaction of the two children when they saw the reward of her magic trick. Though the younger one was clearly grateful to take the candy, the older boy searched thoroughly for where it appeared from. Likely from the long sleeves of her mystery school uniform. The magic and tricks such as these had been lost on someone else like me. Lost on someone like me, my apologies. I wondered what it must have felt like when I was younger and still gullible. Pools of white floated around her cheeks when she stood up and dusted herself off. The children were leaving, but her smile didn't. I took a mental picture of that sunshine smile before I followed my usual route back home. Are you going to encounter one of the other four? Nope, home was quiet. It had been the same in the morning, which meant that my mother hadn't made it home. We were close, my mother and I. On some days it felt like she was the only one who really cared about me. It was comforting. She worked alongside her best friend in managing a cafe they had opened together. The two of them had met through my father in high school. My father, oh dear, apologies to that protagonist, who passed away before I was born, was a huge influence on both their lives. However, he had died after falling onto the tracks while waiting for the train home. I knew of him from the stories my mum had told me. In the end, it was difficult to feel anything for someone who I'd never met, but I did feel for my mum. The rice cooker was set to warm, which meant that I was expected to cook leftovers for myself. After placing my bag next to the door in my room and washing up, I returned to the kitchen and took out a pot from the refrigerator. Inside was leftover that, which I'd planned to cook for dinner. This was the usual play for the two of us. If she was going to be home late, there were usually leftovers in the fridge where I could heat up for myself, and rice was set to be cooked by the time I came home. Not long after I had washed the dishes from dinner, had she stepped into the doorway, box in hand. I am home, Haku. The mother's name is Sayuri. Haku, can you come and take this? I gently placed the newly cleaned dishes in the drying rack next to the sink before hurrying over to her. My hands took the box marked with a logo from her bakery and took it towards the kitchen. After struggling with a pair of heels, she followed me closely until I planted the box on the counter. Thanks. How was school today? Pretty normal, I guess. We learned about old machinery and history today, like the Industrial Revolution. One of the few parts of class I was able to pick up on without daydreaming through it. How about work? From the kitchen proper, I could hear her taking out the silverware before carrying 2 plates to the table. The cafe was mega busy. Barely had time to take a lunch break. He always sent me home with some of the leftovers though, so I thought you might like to have one. She patted the table in front of her. Come on, sit. I obliged and sat down directly across from her. I love the artistic aesthetic so far of the game. It's a very soft palette, but it's really reassuring. Obliged and sat down. Martha removed her coat, laying it gently onto the chair next to her, and dished out the 2 desserts. A fluffy shortcake from her and a fudgy chocolate chunk brownie for me. Ah, I love those. I love both of those, actually. A pure squeal of delight emitted from her at the first bite. The look on her face was true ecstasy. I dream of getting fat from Aoi's cakes. My goodness sakes. Some sort of weird fetish that you don't mind getting fat just as long as it's from a beloved friend's desserts. Lovely. A lot of charisma so far, I love it. When is she going to teach you how to bake? Oh, Haku, you know I'm a total dink when it comes to baking, so what do you do at the cafe? More of the management stuff? When I took a bite of her best friend's brownie, it was a little slice of heaven that sent every thoughts of burnt, salty pastries back to hell. Something about them made me a little hopeful. I think you should at least try to get her to teach you. She took a huge bite while looking pensive. You know, it would make it easier to spend more time with her. Then she reached across the table to slap my shoulder. But then I'd be leaving you here alone. For a few hours at most, I can take care of myself, Mom. My mum sighed but continued her kind smile. I know. I'm a big boy. Clean plates signalled the end of dessert, so we cleared away the plates together before I returned to my room for the night. And then the angels came down and greeted me with a wonderful smile. Okay, no, it's just morning. With a hot breakfast filling my stomach, I could brave the cold city to make it to school. Before the last turn, however, I became distracted by the street performer standing in the brilliant sunlight cascading from between clouds like waterfalls. I kind of like it that there's minimal character dialogue so far, and there's more like just building the scene in the story. Cascading from between clouds like waterfalls. Rubbing my hands together, I thought that without a coat, she could probably feel the cold even more than me. Reactively adjusted the scarf around my shoulders to cover my mouth. Kindness surprised me, spurring me to step into a nearby convenience store and exit with two hot drinks. When I approached her, crystallized eyes flitted towards me from beneath an avalanche fridge. Here, it's cold, so I thought you might like this. The street performer turned to face me fully, and suddenly those memorizing eyes were staring me down. You sure? Ah, it's one of the other main characters of the game. Her accent threw me off a little. It was only slightly different from most of the people in the city, I admit, but underneath was an unrecognizable and faint country-esque dialect. I held a can out in front of me, showing that I was offering it fully to her. Yeah, of course. She smiled and took the warm drink with both hands. You go to school around here? The can was being rolled between her hands instead of drinking it. It was probably an indication that I was right about her being cold. There's nothing more satisfying on a cold day than getting yourself to somewhere like Starbucks or Costco or Cafe Rouge or another coffee shop and just holding the hot drink in your hands and that heat emanating towards the rest of your arms as well. Like, if you ever get that feeling, then yeah. Being pulled from the conversation, my thoughts surrounding her actions, I looked at the time on my phone and understood that the first bell was going to ring soon. Yeah, but I actually need to go now. Bending down, I placed the extra can on the ground next to her change cup, which I discovered was empty. Sorry for not having the time to chat. Good luck with your illusions. Wait, they're not, it's... Aww. I apologized again and began an even brisker journey towards homeroom. The entire morning had me feeling terrible for blowing her off so quickly. I wish I kept better track of my time for left a little earlier. As it stood though, I probably came off as a huge jerk. Not really. You gave her a free drink. A free hot drink. I made a mental note to at least ask her name the next time I saw her. Could I really do something like that though? Talking to others was very unlike myself, but not only did I feel drawn to this white illusionist, I couldn't escape the feeling that I should have been making friends all this time. A future covered in clouds was all that I could see. And then an eraser fell between my feet. The owner glared at me from her desk. My desk neighbor, Sugiyama Yuri? Never talked in class, nor did she put much effort into participation. Some days it wasn't unusual to catch her sleeping at her desk. I wonder if I should wake her up in order for her to not get in trouble for it. I picked up the eraser and handed it back. She hastily throws a nod my way as her thin hand took the eraser. Then she faced the front of the classroom as if I was no longer on the same plane of existence as her. How dare she? The lunch time was just as chaotic as any other day, but I had managed to make it there before the Delacroix gang had left the classroom. Because of this, I was a little more ahead in line. However, it wouldn't help me to get a better seat. With my book tucked underneath the lunch tray, I set out for the terrible table. Not long after I arrived did the fluffy pigtails from the day before. May I sit at this table? She asked it again, her grass-coloured eyes looking just beneath mine. Of course. She sat down, placed a small bag down in front of her before pulling out an even smaller bowl and spoon. Her meal was the same as yesterday's, it seemed. I laid the book fortress flat on the table. You know, You don't have to ask me if you want to sit here. Shiny pigtails bobbled around her shoulders as her eyes made contact with mine for the first time. Okay. The middle school shaped girl nodded with her little head, bringing fluffiness with it. Her eyes sank back to her food, feigning enough interest in it that it may well could have been made entirely of gold. Her quiet voice spoke up again a moment later. Thank you. My hands were shaking underneath the table. When did talking to people become so difficult? My heart pounded against my chest and in my ears. A small voice called out, only making it worse. I'm Gwen. It was me that found her grassy eyes this time. She rolled the spoon around between her thumb and two fingers. I thought that if we're going to be table mates, you should know what to call me by. This time my heart jumped in the opposite direction. Gwen managed a tiny shaking smile towards me before looking back at her discovery of gold. Haku. Or haiku? Her smile becoming a little more tangible, wider. Ah. Even though we didn't speak anymore beyond our introductions at lunch, that smile never once strayed from her face. I wonder if I'd been smiling too. I don't know. Class was much easier to pay attention to after lunch, which wasn't too uncommon. Maybe it's because I was feeling more awake by the time noon had rolled around. At the end of the lesson, though, my mind had begun to wander towards the light of a certain illusionist. The image of her shiny smile was burned into my head, even if only for that moment. Only then did I realize that while I was rushing off to school, she was still standing on that street corner in her uniform. The conclusion came to be that she probably didn't leave that spot even during school hours. I kept asking myself why. And are we going to see the tall girl again around here, claiming that she once again put it in the wrong locker, and therefore she was hoping that it would actually be for the person that she intended for that love letter to be anyways? Okay, yeah. The afternoon bell chimed, releasing us from a world of black and white lectures and into a world of orange sunlight. Around the shoe lockers was never quiet, but today it seemed at least a little less hectic. Nothing fell out of my locker, so I thought that maybe the actual recipient had gotten the message this time. Excuse me? What are you doing around the corner, you cheeky one? She was probably just waiting for a response. At least that's the only reason I could think of her why her dark eyes were watching from around the corner. Since I didn't have many friends, I felt it wasn't my place to judge her actions. What she was doing could have been perfectly normal after all. We are at school anyway, so I think anything goes really. You see the most childish thing at school, you could probably rub it off, because it is at school. In the professional working environment, that's not an excuse. It sends shivers up my spine, though. And why are you smiling? Wind scarred my cheeks, making them feel raw and burned. I pulled my scarf up to cover them, and hustled my leather school bag further up my shoulder. I couldn't remember a time when winter had arrived so early into autumn. At the street corner, I knew I might see her again. Snowy hair danced in the breeze like a candle flame as the illusionist tried earnestly to get passerbys interested in her craft. Too busy to watch another card trick or levitating candy, everyone walked past without acknowledging her efforts. While I made an attempt to approach her, wanted to ask her name, someone else had beat me to it. His security outfit spelled trouble for the mysterious schoolgirl. She didn't fight though, and only picked up her beaten paper cup before walking away from the corner. To me it appeared that she was quite used to this kind of thing happening. I didn't want to lose out on apologizing, as it felt like as if letting her walk away instead of talking to her wouldn't mean that I'd never get to see her again. Something drew me to her, something strong that felt as if it wasn't really a part of my own will. As soon as the walk light turned, I ran across the street to meet her. Sorry for leaving so quickly this morning. I blurted out without thinking of the words that had formed it. They felt so natural instead. The white dove turned to me, obviously surprised to hear my voice directed to her. Going to say that... No, not that. I didn't mean to do that. From this vantage point, I could finally see that the cup was still empty and a pair of stockings at her legs that hadn't been cleaned for quite some time. My suspicions must be spot on. She, however, puffed up her cheeks and narrowed her eyes, ready to release a barrage of words upon me. Magic! Yeah, it's not illusionist, it's magic. A loud scolding made up a single word. Without context, it was difficult to understand what she was yelling at me for. It's the wrong title, not illusionist, but magician or magic. What? Magic! I don't do illusions, I do magic. Don't people usually insist that they're... She took breath deep enough to interrupt me. There are no tricks, no strings, no cards up my sleeves. I really can do magic. Fantasy. Just as I was thinking that I decided to talk to someone who may not be completely all there, her stomach took the perfect opportunity to growl just as loud as she had been scolding me. She laughed nervously, twisting her hands together behind her back. Although she seemed like she might be generally weird, I also saw that she was a young girl in need. Hey, my mum's cafe is just down the street if you need something to eat. Her face pulled in different directions, battling with her thoughts until I figured out what must have been bothering her and corrected my sentence. My treat. Like magic, her distorted face fell back into an innocent, shiny smile. Okay, but if you try anything funny, I'll use my magic against you. Magical. Right. The two of us ventured the short route to my mother's cafe from a street corner. As much as I would have preferred to remain silent, the white dove was determined to have a chat. I couldn't blame her after all. Maybe it made her less nervous about going somewhere with a stranger. Maybe she didn't even understand the danger of something like this though. What's your name? I go by Haku. Haku. She nodded, smiling as she looked up at me. I felt the nervousness welling up in me once more. The shaking of my hands returned and I hid them in my pockets. Well, Haku, you could just call me Shiro. What school do you go to, Shiro? I asked but didn't entirely expect an answer, which was perfect since I wasn't really given one. Some old dorm school out in the middle of nowhere. Shiro's eyes fell towards the ground and I got the impression that meant she didn't care for such a prying question. I figured it was better to level the playing field by opening up as well. I go to Mayanochi High myself. Yeah, I could tell from the uniform. The pants and skirts are nice, but a dead giveaway. She squeezed her hands together again. I noticed you watching me for the past few days before and after school. I've just never seen anything like what you do happen here in the city. I don't mean to come off as a creep. She waved her arms out in front of her, finally releasing them from her back. No, it's not that. I actually wanted to thank you for stepping in and giving me those drinks. I guess I'm just kind of glad it felt like someone noticed I was in trouble. So I guessed right. And? Haku? My mother stepped outside of the glass door of her and Aoi's bakery. Hey Mom, you're out later than usual. Her gaze washed over Shiro, and then came to her own conclusion. And with a girl. Shiro stepped forward, her dress billowing behind her with both steps. She took it upon herself to introduce the new member of the party. I'm Shiro, it's a pleasure to meet you. My mother nearly jumped in surprise. Mother, don't draw any conclusions, please. A girlfriend, Haku? Even though I was a prominent figure of conversation, it felt as though I wasn't going to get in a word between them if waited to not interrupt them. Mom, no. No, not a girlfriend. She is a girl and she is a friend, but she's not a girlfriend. I peered over at Shiro to make sure our exchange wasn't making her more uncomfortable. Instead, it looked as though she was stifling laughter. Sorry, it was just that my Haku had never brought a girl around me. Large grey eyes peered up at me, hiding a taunting sneer behind them. White hair gently tucked behind her ear was at risk of falling in the sudden gust of wind. This wind is super awful. Why don't you come back to our place for now? I held my hand out in protest, as if what I did would make the mysterious girl any less worried about spending time with strangers. Okay. With a single word I realised maybe it was okay to her to accept such offers because she wasn't in the best place to begin with. Then it's settled, but first, I need to go grab something from the cafe. My mother rushed inside, her long blonde hair dancing behind her. Seconds later she appeared again with a large box in hand. To her, this was probably a special occasion. The sound of 3 pairs of shoes against the cold sidewalk echoed in a much different way than my usual walk home. Shiro's white hair sparkled in the now dying sunlight, each of the strands standing out as an individual in the golden light. The only colour to this black and white image was the brown dress she wore. Oh my gosh, I was so caught up I forgot to tell you my name. It's like you've been walking with complete strangers. But she was. I'm Shiori Sato. I'd much rather you just call me Shiori though. Mrs. Sato just sounds too old for someone like me. You're never too old, no matter how much you think you are old. Or no matter how old you actually are. Your age is irrelevant. It's where your heart is at. Shiro nodded and gave my mother a sign of okay. And now we're home. We are lovely and home. At home, we all took off our shoes and made ourselves comfortable in the living space. My mother pulled me to the side as Shiro took a look around the living room. You don't think she's a runaway, do you? My mum pursed her lips in thought, her brows furrowed under the pressure of a thought that was so clearly running wild in her mind. I'm not really sure. She's been in the same spot every day, and I thought she might be starving. That's when I thought I should bring her to you. She nodded and scratched the back of her head. Yeah, okay, you know what? Don't worry about it. I've got this. It was difficult not to worry about it. Yeah, even if she assured me that she had handled it, there was no one I trusted more than her to handle problems. But I was afraid that maybe I hadn't done the right thing. Maybe I just brought her more stress than she didn't need. You two make yourselves comfortable. I'm going to make us some dinner. Ah. The very moment my mother was out of sight, Shiro turned to me with a mischievous look. Pale hands found their way in front of me, palms up and begging. No. Demanding something. Your house key. Excuse me, Shiro? Are you exactly going to imply that you're going to be living with us? This sudden turn of developments is really bizarre. Why do you want my house key? Just hand it to me. I'll make sure it's returned in a second. Not until you tell me why. She sighed and relinquished her sadistic, sunny smile. I just want to show you a trick. I thought about her request for a moment, debating on it if it was entirely safe to put my key into her hands. Attached to it was an old but cherished limited edition keychain from a childhood friend. No one else has ever touched it aside from me since she had given it to me for so many years ago. You're not going to do anything weird with it, are you? Like memorize the grooves on it to break into our house? The return of her sunny smile was like morning. Shiro giggled. A cute, almost raspy sound. I'm already inside, so why would I need to break in? Like, maybe going back outside and then reappearing inside. More eager than afraid to see what kind of illusion she would show me, I handed over the object of her desire, the idea that I might be able to pull out the trick behind it and prove her wrong about it being magic fueled my eagerness even more. Shiro raised the key above the powder blue beret on top of her head and then let it go. There was no sound, no impact on the floor, and no extra movements. I tried my best to look for the solution to the puzzle and figured it must have gone down her sleeve. Why raise it up so far if not to utilize such a motion to her advantage? You're not amazed? Tough crowd. It's in your sleeve. Almost. She pulled up her beret to reveal the key underneath in a nest of white hair. I'm sure you've realized by now that I'm a street magician. Never heard someone insist so much on being called a magician rather than illusionist. She looked from side to side before bringing her face close to mine. You're special, so I'll tell you. I really can do magic. Isn't that what you told us when the first time we actually spoke? And I lied earlier. I can also do illusions. Her whisper brushed by my ears before she stood straight up. The second time she had brought it up, and I was still just as bewildered. Maybe it was just a phase. I What? You don't believe me? Not that anyone ever has. Her dirt-covered stockings cushioned her feet against the wood floor as she began pacing. What if I show you real magic? You'd have to believe me then, right? I guess, sure. She stepped in front of me, the scent of the city following her and the snow-coloured hair caressing her cheeks and shoulders before turning still. The so-called magician held out the key again, small fingers curled around the shapes as she closed her eyes. When she opened both her eyes and hands again, the key was gone. So where is it this time? Shiro fell backwards onto the couch cushions behind her while looking confident. Her smile especially conveyed this message. We'll see. I instantly regretted giving her the thing, and I'm worried over if I'd ever see my keychain again. Folding my arms, I give the room a glance before meeting her eyes dead on. Your sleeve. Two stick-thin arms wrapped in a chocolate dress weaved before me, taunting me with evidence of the wrong answer. Haku, what is your house key doing in the silverware? My mother's voice echoed across the room, sweet but loud. The voice followed as she left the kitchen. You should be a little more careful about not leaving your key behind. What if I'd come home late? When she handed it to me, I rolled the keychain between my fingers, having to acknowledge that it was the exact same cherished charm that I had on to for all these years. I turned to face Shiro, who had the biggest grin on her face. There was no way my mother would believe that somehow Shiro could have put it there without stepping foot into the room. It's not like I could believe it either, though. It won't happen again. Dinner's ready anyway. Watch just about to set it all down. I can help. Shiro had chimed in, her hand raised high into the air. My mother passed me a smile before turning her attention to the young magician. The two of them left for the kitchen, leaving me dumbfounded by an inexplicable trick. I'll take the plates if you take the tea. I settled down at the table. The charm between my fingers suddenly felt so foreign. It was the same one I had carried for all those years, but now it had a different air about it. I hope you like curry, Shiro. My mother placed 3 plates at the table. Her curry dam was perfect, as always, at separating the curry from the chopped cabbage on the other side of the dish. It's got to be better than anything I've had lately. She barely stopped herself before digging in. Ah, thanks for the food. Thanks for the food? My mother matched Shiro's energy. Thanks for the food. She appeared to me as a starved animal getting her first meal in weeks. How much had she been able to eat during her time on that corner? Was there even enough money to buy anything with enough calories? When we were all closer to finishing our food, my mother finally asked a question we were both unsure of. Her voice was calm and empathetic. I recognized the tone from many of our own conversations. I have to ask, Shiro, are you a runaway? I'm not a runaway. Her bold voice gripped the answer quickly and firmly. Yikes. My parents died and I've been moving around ever since. Haku, hand me your phone. Yet another item of mine, she demanded with open palms. I produced a device from my pocket and unlocked it for her. It was a small explosion that happened where they worked. Her pale fingers expertly navigated the phone until she produced an online obituary with the faces of her parents and handed it back to me. I looked from the picture on the site and then back to Shiro. Black hair and brown eyes. Proved much different than the girl sitting next to me. Her skin was porcelain, her eyes like grey ice. Her hair was the colour of snow and her eyelashes appeared like frost. There is no mistaking it though. Their faces were identical from the shape of her mother's eyes to the small curl on her father's lips. Don't let the black hair fool you. They're really my parents. I'm albino. I was born like this. Blush on fair cheeks was able to appear much more prominently. Her icy eyes peered down her feet. I passed the phone to my mother so that she could confirm as well. They treated me differently because of how I looked. I guess I still kind of hold it against them. Silence sprouted around the room, growing with each passing second. Both my mother and I needed the time to process what it was that we were being told. I used to go to a school outside of town, but I just couldn't handle it. Actually, I guess it does make me a runaway. My mother stood up from her chair and grabbed 3 plates from the kitchen, balancing them in her hands and on her arm. Without a word, she focused on setting down slices of cheesecake in front of every one of us. Shiro, why don't you stay with us for a while? It's not good for you to stay out there alone. She sat back down. The inclusion of dessert often preceded difficult questions for her. I figured it was either a bargaining tactic or because she needed Aoi's baking to raise her courage. The suggestion came as a surprise to not only me but also to Shiro, who suddenly realized there was a world outside of her stocking-covered toes. At first she could only stare, the gears turning behind Shiro's eyes as she processed the information. I would like that. She said it with a firm nod attached. Just promise me that you'll go to school. Aoi would never let me live it down if I invited a delinquent to live in my house. I have a reputation to keep up, you know. Snowy bangs fell across frosty lashes as she tilted her head to one side. Aoi? My mum's best friend. Shiro moved her pale eyes to my mother again. A surprisingly serious question sprung forth. You won't be pressed for money if I stay here. Don't worry about things like that. I make enough money to run in a cafe. You should be worried about your education at your age, not money. You could worry about your future when I feel like you're in a good place to have it in your own hands. Right now, Shiro, your only job is to be a student. The cheesecake was delicious but seemed to be overshadowed by the current conversation. It didn't seem to stop my mother, who was smiling in bliss every time she took a bite. Lovely. Lovely dovey. Afterwards, the plates were being picked up with such conviction that I felt the power of my mother's confidence was washing across the room. I'll take care of these dishes and start up the bath. Haku, why don't you show her around and set her up in the spare room? There's a bunch of boxes in there right now. What should I do with them? Just put them in my room. I'll clear some space in my closet for them later. I opened the door into the hallway, which was much cooler than the living room and kitchen since they weren't heated. The floorboards felt like ice with each step. Leading Shiro up the stairs, I kept looking back to make sure she was following. Is this really fine? Her voice called out to me in the dim light between the 2 floors. Yeah, well, my mum says it's so. So it is. I can't wait to see my new room. As though it was a secret, Shiro had whispered it. It was just an empty room with a bunch of boxes in it, though. You sure you want to be alone in the room with me? What? Though I had meant it as a confirmation of her consent, it sounded vaguely like a threat as well. I'm fine. If you try anything weird, I could just blow you out of a window with my magic. Her warning came with a pleasant smile. Her confidence made me feel a little better, though. Inspired me, even. There were so many things I could stop worrying about and just do with confidence like hers. Something about her being here is just a little bit discomforting, especially with her magic abilities. The door creaked as I pressed my hand against it, revealing a room with very little in it. It was my father's old room, and the boxes were mostly filled with things of his that my mother had locked away. It was a world of things that reminded her of the past and a future that never would be. I didn't blame her for locking them away, but the room had always felt like a grave to me. In all of my life, I could remember a few times I had set foot into this forgotten shrine. It was only to put some extra things away at my mother's request. Let's get to work then. I rolled up my sleeves to keep them out of the way and lifted a small but heavy box and carried it outside of a graveyard and into my mother's room. A graveyard, for goodness sakes, protagonist! Was she really going to be okay with this? Shiro gently placed down a box next to mine and looked up at me with concern in those crystal eyes. All I could do in return was nod and go back for me. Something fell to the floor as I lifted one of the remaining boxes. Oh, what's this? Shiro picked up the fallen item and examined it. In her hands was an old Insta camera covered in dust, just another grave in the graveyard. A camera? Yeah, I guess that made it here, huh? When I was younger, I wanted to be a photographer. My mum bought me a camera and for a while it was a lot of fun. After using it for a bit, it felt like that's what I was expected to be in that pressure. Why was I so comfortable talking about this with her? I stowed my words within my stomach and shook it off instead of finishing my sentence. The wild magician didn't seem to notice. Can I use it? Her voice was dripping with excitement. Maybe it felt exciting to her to see all the nice things that had just been collecting dust in our graveyard. If it still works after that tumble. Excitement sprouted around her, taking roots within the object in her hands. That same excitement withered before it could properly blossom as she clicked on the button to turn the camera on. It's not turning on, it's probably out of batteries. Yeah, exactly. Probably just the batteries. I think I have some in my room. I picked up the last box of my father's things and took them to my mother's room before walking into my own. From the hallway came my mother's voice, calling out to our new guest. Shiro, the bath is ready. The pitter-patter of an excited girl's steps sounded across the hallway and down the stairs. She reminded me of a child who was excited about everything enough to immediately drop one thing for another. After tidying the empty room, it looked less like a resting place for the dead and more like one for the living. From my mother's closet, a small but plush futon now adorned the center of the room. The still empty room openly revealed that Shiro had arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back. I find myself hoping that she had something more at school. Nestled between a few stacks of books in the closet of my room was a pack of batteries. How long had it been since I used something that required batteries like this? It often felt like the world was moving both slowly and quickly. Maybe I just hadn't held my head up enough to get a good look as it passed by me by. Even something happening very slowly can seem like it was over in an instant if you weren't paying attention. I lay down on top of the blankets on my bed, staring at the blank ceiling trying to figure out where life was taking me or maybe where I was supposed to already be. Small footsteps contrasted greatly against the ones that had hurried to the bath, but it was still the same young girl who created them. Hey! A green kimono. Smoothed out snowy hair without her powdery blue beret made her appear much smaller than before. Without a chocolate dress, her skin tone appeared to be a little less pale. It's cute, right? Shiro span around in the light green yukata. Okay, it's a yukata, not a kimono. Her hands tucked inside the sleeves awkwardly, but her tiny pale fingers poking out to hold onto the fabric. Your mum said I could sleep in it. It's kind of like staying in a ryokan, right? So is that like a hotel or somewhere similar? I scratched my cheek and thought again about the fact her clothes were all that she had had with her. As usual, my mother was one step ahead of any problem that thrown with her. Yeah. Yeah, as in it's cute, or yeah, as in like it's like a ryokan. Yeah. Her lips pursed into a pout made especially for my teaching. She set herself onto my doorframe with her hand. I'll just assume it means both then. The pout melted as quickly as it formed when she saw the camera in my hands. With one click, the red light came on to signal it was ready to be used once again. I aimed the viewfinder at her and pressed the button for the shutter. The camera split out a blackened image which slowly started to light with each passing second. In it was the image of a growing smile I had once taken a mental photo of. It works! She stared at a picture in my hands, trembling with excitement. I took the photo but handed her the camera. I'll let you have it in exchange for letting me keep this picture. Shiro nodded furiously as she took the camera from my hands. Her elation upon receiving it reminded me on the day my mother had gifted me the camera. A difficult decision, but I was happy to see that the camera was find use once again. Shiro also now had something else for her empty room as well. Her excitement was put on pause as she turned her eyes back up to me. Are there any house rules I should know about? I want to be a proper housemate, you know. Just don't cause trouble and keep out of the kitchen while my mum is cooking. I think I can do that, yeah. And just apply common sense. Don't make a mess of things. She nodded as if she had to reassure herself. Anyway, Haku, I want to thank you properly for today. For all of this. Things have been hectic today, but in a good way, you know. Thank you, Haku. You should be thanking my mom. I already did, but I wanted to thank you too. Don't worry about it. Like she said, just focus on your studies, do well, and that will be thanks enough. I'm going to get some sleep now. Good night, Haku. Thank you again. Good night, Shiro. Warm rays of sunlight kissed my blankets and face, waking me just before my alarm usually went off. I let the bed cradle me for a little longer while I was crushed with thoughts of how different my life had become after just one quick decision. My offer to treat a girl at my mother's cafe had ended up with her staying with us. I gave thought to the cute girl who was probably fast asleep on the spare futon in the next room over. Could I keep up a friendship like this? After all, it was probably the easiest way to maintain one, and Shiro was kind enough that I wanted to be friends with her at least. And she had magic. Shiro had made me believe in magic by showing me undeniable proof. I still couldn't wrap my head around it. It was as if I was completely unable to process the information that I had personally witnessed. There was the unshakable feeling that maybe I was going crazy. Not long after I started to struggle beneath the weight of my thoughts did I smell the cooking of food. The rumble of my stomach gave me enough energy to move from my bed and all the way to the bathroom sink. After washing up and throwing on my uniform, I combed my hair before turning to the living room. In the seat beside me, the new resident had made herself comfortable at the breakfast table. I could finally bear witness to the true colours of her now clean clothes. Shiro, freshly cleaned up, looked much healthier than that had been adopted by the streets. My mother laid down plates in front of us, filled to the brim with toast, fruit and sausages. Whoa! She sat back in her chair, shock written across her face. I get to eat breakfast here too? My mother laughed and went back to the tea. Ah, she's much more surprised and appreciated by everything, rather than just being somebody who would just happily have it. Mischievously, pre-expectedly, she delivered it in 3 different glasses and proceeded to sit down at the table with the rest of us. Shiro, I called your school and had a talk with them. The new look on her face was near terror. Her pale hands no longer seemed eager to help devour the plate in front of her. I asked them to let you live here, and they've agreed to it for now. All you have to do is prove that it's good for you to stay here by improving your grades and staying out of trouble. Pure light found the way back into her colourless eyes when she heard the rest of the news. It appeared that my mum had some magic all on her own. Mums do have magic. They will go to any lengths to help out the ones that they truly desire. Their children, their family members, their children's friends. I won't let you down. It was easier for all of us to eat knowing that the news was good. They're letting you stay home today so that we could get some things sorted out. Shopping mostly. There's some things you're going to need while you're staying here. Without much effort, my mother was able to use the word home so casually. Yeah, rather than saying at this house, she uses it as home. And home is a lovely word rather than house, because house is just a building. A home is a place with memories. I wanted to have her confidence. I even continued to envy Shiro's. But everything was changing so fast. Too fast. I couldn't keep my head above the water. By the time I had finished breakfast, the 2 of them had already moved on with their mornings. Shiro put down her glass, now empty of tea, and then immediately grabbed mine. Though a mischievous smile, she took a sip from my cup and placed it back in front of me before standing. Your cooking is amazing, Sayori. From across the room I could see the slight brush spreading over my mother's cheeks. Meanwhile, I stared at my cup and tried to figure out what I was meant to do with it at this. What I was meant to do with it is, but bleh. Conversations, for goodness sakes. We're gonna head out now, Haku. Lock up when you leave. Be careful. Later, Haku. Have fun at school. Oh, Shiro, here, let me get this coat for you. Shiro waved at me as my mother dressed her in a beige coat. The scene reminded me of a mother taking care of a child. While it was difficult to imagine another member being in our family, it was oddly comforting that the 2 of them found it easy to treat each other like one. And then the house was quiet once more. Familiar silence gave my brain a short break from the fuss and chaos that had suddenly ripped into my quiet life. I washed the breakfast dishes before I began the ritual of packing up my bags, putting on my shoes, and heading out for school. In our second period class, we were being tested on some of the topics that we were supposed to be learning during the last month. Though the teacher guaranteed it would be easier to retain the knowledge this way, none of the students seemed pleased about it. Once the test began, I could hear a small sound from my neighbour's desk every few seconds. The mousy-haired girl was using her pencil to determine her answer. On each of the flat sections was a different answer for the multiple choice options. I didn't know if she was unmotivated or lazy or just didn't really understand the material, but she had fallen back on a cliche tactic to get through it. Although it was easy to judge her for this tactic, I couldn't help but think how cute it was that she was enacting it. After we all handed in our work, the bell rang, signifying the dawn of lunch. I waited for Gwen to arrive, like usual, but I never once saw her small body or fluffy pigtails over the pages of my book. The lunch period was less stressful, but I'd be lying if I said if I wasn't a little bit lonely. Was I really alone, or had I just gotten so used to having a table mate that it felt too different? Back in the classroom, it was business as usual. Even after a difficult test, our teacher wasn't empathetic enough to give us a break. She spent the day reviewing the material on our next subject by calling on us to answer a question out loud. While Blanche seemed eager to answer something, the teacher tried to call on each person at least once in class. This cut into Blanche's time to answer all the questions herself. When the teacher finally remembered that I existed, a question fell to me. Haku, answer this next one. It's Tomogozen, obviously. I totally didn't Google this one, for goodness sakes. You go there. Very good, now remember that. Whoa, with faith that I wouldn't be called on for some time again, I let myself become distracted. My eyes fell to Sugiyama, who was staring off into the distance with a frown on her face. Were you displeased that I got this question correct? As usual, she seemed so tuned out to the world around her, like it didn't exist alongside her. Her 1,000-yard stare did create some concern that bubbled up within my skin, though. Between her unbrushed hair and thin fingers, something was off about her. I thought it back to Shiro at home and wondered how she found it so easy to talk to strangers like me. Did I just need to push myself to be more like her? After the boring barrage of questions, I escaped with only having to answer 2 of them. Yep. With a bell chimed to signal our time at school had come to a close for the day, I grabbed my bag and began my journey to the shoe lockers. And we're going to have sight of that tall girl again. The outdoor walkway connecting 2 of the school buildings was where the winter wind hit the worst. Here the air pushed through the valley between the buildings, making the biting wind feel even colder. It's a blessing to have a beard because it doesn't feel as cold. It was this walkway in particular that caused many of the students to wear scarves to their classrooms. Despite the protests of the teachers, eventually they caved and started wearing them sometimes as well. A walkway that could change the dress code. A small prod at my shoulder caused me to turn on the spot to face the person who administrated it. Before me stood someone I never expected to approach anyone alone. Pardon me. Hi there. I hope you are doing well. Before I could react to the bewilderment that she would even talk to me, pale white hands quickly thrust a notebook with her name on it towards me. I'm sorry, what is this? Notes about Tomogozen. Seems like you could use them. I wasn't really that terrible today, was I? Both the questions I had been called to answer in the classroom had been about prominent figures. The lesson had been on her and other female warriors of the time period, and I admittedly may not have been quite as learned as she was on the subject. Opening the book and glancing inside, I noticed that Blanc had composed them with beautiful handwriting, small lines and sometimes charts filled with gaps to better circulate the information. Notably, it read a lot easier than the textbook we were given in class. It was surprising. If this was her key to keeping her grades up while studying abroad, she was likely doing better than most of the school. Thanks. I appreciate it. Blanc nodded lightly and proceeded to walk past me without another word. I'm thinking that as well. Like, why would she do that to somebody that she doesn't know? Like, just giving us something, especially if it's with her own work as well, writing notes down. Confusion settled in as I find myself unable to decide if the interaction with her had been positive or if she was just making fun of me. Well, she didn't look like she was smirking at us, so I guess that's a sign. I continued to skim over the notebook as I strolled down the walkway and into the next building over. Most of the pages were filled with things we had already learned in class, but at the end I found about 5 pages worth of information we hadn't covered yet. At the entrance I regularly saw the same person hanging around the shoe lockers at this time of day. I checked around to see if I could spot them. Instead of hiding today, she was standing amongst a small group of female classmates. It wasn't long before I heard her name, Yamimi, in the context of a very loud conversation. She, however, looked as if she had been uncomfortable in her setting, but I considered the possibility that I may have been projecting my feelings upon her. Shiro's street corner felt so much cooler. I lingered for a moment, recounting all the gears had started turning in my life. Yet here I was, still going to school and acting no different from usual, despite knowing that magic was real. There she was, waiting at home for me. As soon as I entered the living room, she hopped up from her couch to greet me. Welcome home! Hey, where's my mum? Aoi called her to pick up something. I nodded while trying to examine her inconspicuously. Pale hues seemed to match her visibly, but perhaps not her personality. Shiro noticed my stare and twirled around, the skirt billowing out all around her. She brought me a new outfit. Pressing my way through to the couch, I sat down on the side opposite to where Shiro had just stood up. My leather bag went beside the couch, knowing that it may be a while before I could retire to my bedroom. We also went out for lunch at her cafe and looked at some furniture. So... How did you make it appear in the spoon drawer? A smile crept up between the two of us. Her demeanor immediately shifted as she sat down next to me. I'm telling you, it's magic. She whispered it like a secret despite no one else having been around to hear it. I'll have to admit I'm curious, but I don't know if I'm completely convinced yet. Can't you do anything bigger? She pressed her hands together in her lap and stared down at her feet. I can't. I'm sorry. I'm only allowed to do the smaller stuff. What do you mean you're only allowed? That in itself strikes red flags. Allowed? Don't worry about it. There's more to you than you let on, Shiro. She sat straight up again as soon as we heard the front door open. I'm home! The greeting came from the hallway but continued through the living room door. Welcome home. Welcome back. Sorry about that, Shiro. Someone wrote about a cafe in a blog or something. It solves the riddle about why we've been so busy, but, I don't think it'll let up anytime soon. We got fresh jam for toast tomorrow, though. Some of the fruit was about to go bad, so we worked it into this. She ran to the kitchen to put it away. Haku, how was school? Normal, I think. Maybe become less normal by not sitting with Gwen at lunch. Maybe getting notes from Blanc to make it less normal. But it was too much effort to have a conversation about a day that wasn't normal. Seeing that my mother was busy settling back into her home life, I turned my attention back to Shiro and tried to make some sort of conversation with her. I never asked, do you have anything you need to go back and get? Or is there nothing? I have a few things. I have them away in my shoe locker at school. I haven't been there in a while. She looked pensive. Her white eyebrows frowned as she fell deeper into her thoughts. The door of the living room shut behind my mother, who had quickly disappeared from our scene. It took a moment before Shiro spoke up again. I guess I'll have to go back tomorrow. It'll be weird. You don't have anyone back at school that you think will be happy to see you? Not that I had anyone myself. We do. Shiro, we want to be friends with you. Who wants to be friends with someone that looks like me? They can't decide if I look more like an old lady or someone who is really sick. Although I immediately felt like I shouldn't have asked, I was happy to hear her open up to me. I could try telling them why I look this way, that I'm not sick or old, if they thought they wouldn't catch what I had by being near me. A sigh spilled forth from my mouth before I even knew it had formed. It was just a display of the emotions I usually kept deep within my stomach. If it matters, I'll be your friend. Of course it matters. You're special. We've known each other for a day. Literally a day. And you already grace us that we're special. What do you mean by that? There was some reason you approached me yesterday, right? Fate brought you to me. Not like the people who came to me to see my tricks. You came to me because of something else, right? And then you invited me into your home. Saying that it was kind of fate feels like it invalidates my kindness for kindness' sake. Fate wouldn't have brought me here if you weren't so kind. But that's still because of you. If you say so. So too. She had already given my mother a nickname. You don't need to shorten Sayori. It's short enough of a name. And I wonder if I'd soon be receiving one as well. Ha. As if speaking a name had summoned a goddess, my mother stepped back into the living room, scrolling through a phone in her hand without paying mind to her surroundings. Just going to order out tonight. Pizza sound good? Sounds good, Mom. Pizza wasn't usually on the menu, but I liked it, so I wasn't about to decline. Shiro's eyes lit up, however, and she turned to me with a mask of wondrous disbelief covering her face. Pizza? I think Shiro's fine with pizza. My mum didn't take her eyes off her phone, but it still came into a kind golden smile. Just ordering now. Shiro, you're fine with just pepperoni, right? Yep. Propping herself up across the back of the couch, she seemed more excited with just the thought of eating pizza in general. It probably doesn't matter what it was topped with in the end. Okay. Done. Would even ask Shiro for if she has any dietary requirements. Done. I need to go crunch some numbers for a bit. Will you two be fine by yourselves? Yeah, of course. Oh right, Haku. I need you to wake up early to show Shiro the way to the train station so she can get to school tomorrow. Alright. Shiori seems like a really kind mum. She really made the remark as soon as my mother was out of the room. Truthfully, my mother was all I ever had in my life, so we naturally grew close. I couldn't imagine losing her like Shiro had lost hers. She is. Shiro straightened herself out of the couch, planting her bottom on the couch cushion once again. The variety show playing in the background helped to break the awkward silence that had suddenly sprouted in between us. I didn't always have magic. The statement came without a question, but it felt as effortless as it had been to answer to one. No? She shook her head, white hair flying around the white dove's face. It didn't appear until after the explosion happened. This reminds me of Chaos Child, where an explosion happened and only those around the explosion of a certain age group could have an ability for themselves. Off topic, I know, but it just reminded me of that. So you were there when it happened? Yes. Horror chilled my spine, but the solemn look on her face was what brought the needles to my heart. Did you? I did. It happened right in front of me. Her confidence was suddenly melting away, leaving me starved for a happy ending that stories always had. Is it okay if I don't talk about that part? If it bothers you, we don't have to talk about it ever again. I just thought you should know that I didn't believe in magic at first either. It seemed like you needed to hear that. I was left wondering if the struggle I was having had been so obviously written on my face. Maybe I did. It's just been really hard to take any of this in. Thank you. But Shiro, if you ever do need someone to talk to, I can listen. Haku, thank you. After the festivals with the pizza had come to a close, I find myself studying Blanche's notes at my desk. I figure the sooner I return them to her, the better. Just use a camera we have and just literally take pictures of the notes. Like, that would be much easier than just trying to memorize everything, because then you can memorize of the copy. If I had gotten on to her bad side after all, it'd been easier to tell her I consumed her knowledge sooner rather than later, and then no longer do business with her library of notes. A knock at my door distracted me. Upon answering it, Shiro greeted me with the instant camera and a stack of photos. Hey Haku, I want to show you the pictures I took while we were out today. She handed over a stack and moved herself shoulder to shoulder with me. The first one was a picture of a dog. She pointed at the subject of this picture. One of your neighbours has this really small dog and she let me pet it this morning before we went shopping. The second was a group of vibrant winter blossoms. These camellias was really pretty. Your mum told me that they were called that. Those are really good, Shiro. Crystal clear, well balanced. And they were fantastic for being taken with the instant camera. More and more, with that camera in hand, she reminded me of my younger self. The excitement such a device created by just being in her hands was enough inspiration to create wonderful pictures. I missed that feeling, but I didn't know if I would get it back. I love this thing, it's so fun. Thank you again, Haku. I'm taking really good care of it. She sorted through the pictures again before handing me a picture of my mother enjoying a dessert at the cafe. Stay close to your mum and always be kind to her. You don't need to tell me. I think she's telling us that because she doesn't have a mother to do that with. The realization of what she was telling me settled in at that moment. My answer changed a little. I know. Well, I better head to bed. I have a long day in front of me tomorrow. Good night, Haku. Good night, Shiro. I returned to my desk and continued to look over Blanche's notes a little longer before calling it an end to my day. Okay folks, I think we're going to end this off here for the time being. It has been a really long first episode. I didn't expect the demo to go on for this long, and oh yeeks. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Please check out the game for yourselves. There will be a link down in the description below where you can download this game for yourselves. It is completely for free. And please give the developers some comments of what you think about this game, what you liked about this game, and what you think could be improved. The only thing that I think is missing so far is a button that allows you to skip through the text, like there would be on other visual novel games, where you can just click on it and it skips through the text so that you can get through dialogue that you've already been through if you're looking for a different ending on your second run. So thank you all so much for watching, and see you all on the next time of Mise on Sen. Have a good day and take care of yourselves.